Hey guys, so today we're going to be doing more with Python Flask, and the web application we're going to make today is basically I call it the random website, and so the first page we're going to make is it's going to ask you how many random numbers would you like to generate, and so if I say 100 random numbers and I want to generate them between 0 and 200, for example, and I click generate, then it's going to generate a bunch of random numbers, 100 of them, and it's going to print them out all on the web page, all in separate paragraph tags. And so we know how to generate random numbers or make a list of random numbers in Python. And so the problem is if we took this list and we passed it to our HTML, like we've done before, it would display in just like one single list. And so we need a way to be able to loop through some list that gets passed from Python into my HTML in the actual HTML document. And so for this, we would need to use another language, which is Python-ish. So it's uses a really similar syntax to Python, and it's called Jinja. And so Jinja is used along with Python and HTML, and it's called a web template engine. And so there's a whole bunch of these, but Flask uses Jinja, and so that's what we're going to use. So looking at the source code, right now, here's what we're starting with. So we have main.py, and we already talked about the render template function and how when we return render template index.html, it's going to return this index page. We also talked about using a base.html base page. So basically everything is going to be based off of this base. So we don't really have to modify base.html at all. We can just code everything in index.html right between the open content block and the closed content block. And so here is basically the body of my web page. And so right now nothing is in the web page. Here it is. It's great. It's gray only because I threw a gray background in style.css. Very fancy. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to make a URL that brings me to another web page, and we're going to call that like the random number web page or something like that. And so in order to do this, with Flask, I need an app.route in order to make a link. So I'm going to start by saying app.route. And I'm going to call this get random number. And let's call this def get random number. And then I'm going to return render template. And then I'm going to have to make a new HTML page. So let's call our HTML page randomnumber.html. Don't worry about if sometimes I use double quotes and sometimes I use single quotes. I'm just used to coding in Java, which has to use double quotes. So I switch back and forth between the two. So randomnumber.html, now I'm going to need to actually make that web page. I'm also going to unindent this. There we go. So in order to do that, I'm going to make a copy of this one here. And I'm going to call it random number. random.html. Great, wonderful. Here we go. And so now I have an app.route and a function that's going to take me to random number.html, and so now I need to be able to make a hyperlink for this. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make an h1 tag, and say the random website. And then I'm going to make an a tag. Obviously this is not going to be very well formatted or very fancy CSS wise, but that's okay because right now we're just worried about the back end stuff. And so our a tag is going to have a reference. And so here's the difference between making just like a regular hyperlink in HTML and a hyperlink that actually works with Flask. And so in order for it to work with Flask, we need to use something called URL_for. And so basically, we can make a reference to an app.route. So my app.route, I'm going to do open curly bracket, double open curly brackets, because basically when I do use double open curly brackets, or really any open curly brackets inside of my HTML, then Flask knows that it should be looking for Jinja code. And so the Jinja code here is Python. It's Python really. We're going to say URL_for, and then get random number. That was my app.route that was connected to that. So for example, if I go back to my Python, I see get random number, it has to match that. Let's go back to index, and then that's it for my href, and now I can just say, let's say, generate random numbers. Okay, so now if I run this, it says the random website. I click generate random numbers, and it brings me to random number.html. Great! And so now the rest of my code is just going to go into random number.html. So let's go into here. And so, because right now there's nothing in here, and so the first thing I want to do is I need to make a form that's going to be tied to another app.route. So I'm going to say form action equals, let's do calc, method equals post. Do I need anything else? I don't think so. I'm surprised it doesn't close the form tag for me. Okay, and so my first thing I want to say inside my form is how many numbers do you want to generate? So let's put that in like an h4 tag. How many numbers do you want to generate? And then all in the same line, well, I'll go to the next line, but if there's no break, it's only going to be one line. And so, actually, you know what, let's put this all inside the h4 tag so that it's all in the same line. So I'm still inside the h4 tag, and let's make an input for a text. So type equals text, and name equals, let's say, number input. Let's give it a placeholder, which is just going to say exactly like what you're supposed to enter here. So enter number. Oops, I forgot to put this inside of quotes. And then let's also make it like a smaller size so that it's not like really big. To do that, you use the size parameter. Let's make it like 8 numbers wide. And then we close the tag. Let me just run this just to see what it looks like. Great, so enter a number, we put it in there. Lovely. Let's also, I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to say, instead of how many numbers do you want to generate this time, I'm going to say between, and then I'm going to have another input, so between something and something, right? So between some value and some other value, and I'm going to copy this input tag here. And I already have my close H4, so between blank and blank. I'm going to call this my minimum value for the name. I'm going to call this my maximum value for the name, so that my reference to these different text input values are called min and max. So I have a number that's input, I have a min, and a max. I should really maybe call this something like how many. This way I know specifically what it means. Okay, and then after that I'm going to need some sort of button. And so input, that's going to be another input tag. The type is equal to submit. And what else do I want my button to have? Let's have a value. And let's say our value is generate. So generate the random numbers. And let's give it an ID. So equal to button 1. Great. Okay, so running this again. Generate random numbers. Alright, great. Our web page looks good. We should probably also add a back home button. Yeah, let's do that. So I'm going to copy this code, this A link here. And I'm going to put I'll put it before the form starts. And then for this one, I'm really just going to do URL for index. Actually, there's no app.route for index, it's just slash. So, index. Okay, that works. So we had to say URL for index, which is the function tied to my app.route. Okay, so, and let's call this back home. Alright. Great. And so now I have back home, and I can go back and forth between the two. So I guess URL for, actually, I think I said this wrong earlier. Index, when we did this here, get random number, is the function. So the function that is in main, this function name, is what I put for my URL. Okay. So now I have my HTML. I need to write Python code that is going to work along with it. So let's make another app.route. And let's call this, I think I called it calc. Remember that the form action needs to be the exact same name as your app.route value. So if I go into here, I look at my form action is calc, and so this has to match. Also, because my form is going to be sending, receiving values to and from the server, I also need a methods equals get post. And then I like to name the function the same thing. Okay, so now we're going to have three variables. So we have a variable that's going to be how many, right? So how many numbers, let's call it how many, and let it set it equal to, I should just use underscore because this is Python and not Java. I'm sorry for switching back and forth between both notations. And so how many, I'm going to set this equal to request. Now, if you don't have this imported, make sure that it's imported at the top, otherwise you can't use it. So request.form, and then I think I called it how many. I think it was exactly the same. And then min, I'm going to set this equal to another request.form min, and then the max number is going to be request.form max. And so these three values are just tied to the name of my text entry box. Okay. And so now I have those values, and now I want to generate a list of random integers. So I'm going to make a list, call it values, and I'm going to set it equal to an empty list. And then I need to generate some number of random numbers between min and max. So I need to do something some number of times. How many times am I doing it? I'm doing it how many, right? How many is the number of times? So I would say something like for x, or let's say for times in range, how many, I want to append a random integer between min and max to my values. So first thing I need to do is import random. And now I can say random dot rand int between min and max. Oops. And then I need to assign this to a variable or just append it. So values dot append this random integer. Okay. So for now, let's just print it, just so we could see it made. And then let's return render template. It's really the same exact render template as before. So let's just copy that, put it in here. And we're going to have to pass values over to the HTML. So I'm going to say values equals values, just to know that when I render this template, I want to pass that list of random numbers over to the HTML side. Now, I'm not doing anything with it yet. Let's just see if it prints correctly. And so if I enter a number like, so 100, and then I want to generate numbers between 1 and 10, and I click generate. For times in range, how many? str cannot be converted to So the reason why this doesn't work is because when you use request.form, request.form pulls the value in as a string, and so we need to cast this to an integer. Otherwise, it cannot calculate a random number between some string value and some other string value, and it cannot loop some string value number of times. So these all need to be integers before we can start using them as integers. Okay, so let's try it again. And let's do 100, and 1, and 10. Generate. Another error. Values.append, return unsupported operand type S for plus. Oh, I forgot to call this max. Okay, let's try this one more time. Yay! Oh, and it's printing like an insane amount of times because I put the print statement inside the for loop. But it seems like it's working. Great! Alright, and so now we need to be able to get this and do something on the HTML side. So we know it's getting passed in, we know it's printing, and it's calculating what we need to calculate. So now, going back to the HTML, here's where Jinja comes in. And so we have values, right? So like if I, for example, down here, if I made a single paragraph tag, and I did double curly brackets, which is how we've always used variables coming over from HTML. If I just say values, then this will print the whole list, and the whole list will be over there, right? So again, if I do 100, and 1, and 10, and generate, it's great. I mean, it'll show up as a list, but it's not formatted nicely. So it would be really nice if we could make these their own separate paragraph tags, or better yet, like a list, a bulleted list or something like that, or an unnumbered or a numbered list. So what we need to do is we need a for loop. And so the syntax for for loops in Jinja is we use curly brackets and then percent signs. And basically any Jinja code is going to go inside of this. So if you're writing like loops or conditionals, that's going to go inside of this fancy looking curly bracket thing. And so then we're going to say basically the same Python syntax that we would to loop through all the values in a list. So I would say for, let's say, val in values, right? That's going to loop through every single value in the values list, just like you would have done in Python. I'm going to make a paragraph tag for now, and let's, instead of values, let's do val. So now val is a variable that is going to loop through, and it's one value, then the next value, then the next value, then the next value. And then after that, I need to close the loop. So anytime you open this like fancy Jinja code, curly bracket, percent sign things, you have to also close it. So you'd say end for. So you start the for loop, you end the for loop, and then in between that is where this is the thing that's going to repeat. So now when I run this again, I go in and try it. And let's do 300 this time. And generate. And now they're all their own separate paragraph tags. And so those don't even have to be separate paragraph tags. They could be any kind of tag that you want, right? So This could even be like correspond to like an image file, and then they could just be like 100 different image tags or buttons or anything like that. And so that's what's really nice about Jinja. You can also use Jinja for if statements and things like that. And so the next thing we're going to try is to now make another web page, and that web page is going to, instead of generating random numbers between min and max, it's going to generate random strings. And that's it.